Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp at what is the final day of SEC Media Days here at the College Football Hall of Fame in downtown Atlanta. We've got a really fun show coming up for you. Another great pair of guests. Our normal Thursday guest, Terrence Edwards, can't be with us today, but in his place, two things I think you're going to really love. We'll tell you more about that here coming up in a moment. Georgia also got a commitment yesterday. We will, as you would expect, talk about that, especially in light of the more broad recruiting conversation that's been taking place around Georgia over the course of the last 48 hours or so. And I'll say this. It's very interesting here in Atlanta right now, a very subdued mood. It's much quieter than it's been any other time in the week. It's almost like if you've ever been to one of a trade show within your profession, like the last day, people are just either ready to go home or they are going home. It sort of feels like you got that vibe around SEC Media Days here today. However, what's interesting about that is, in sharp contrast to the very quiet atmosphere around Radio Row, or I guess Digital Alley, whatever it is they call it now, and just the overall just sort of quietness of the room in general, there is a chance the single biggest story of Media Days plays out here today. And we're going to talk about what it is later on. But for now, we'll get your comments. Let us see what's happening here. UGA Marine here at DawgNation.com on the subject of Valdine Sohn, who actually is going to commit somewhere tomorrow. I had a well-placed source tell me, and by well-placed, it was Jeff Sintel. Jeff Sintel texted me at like 5:30 this morning. Like, anytime now I also called Kaylee at like 7:30 this morning to tell her some nonsense. So, like, I guess I'm guilty of this too. But anytime somebody, like, texts you at like 5:30 in the morning, you're a little nervous. Now, I also wake up early, so I was already awake because I'm getting my day started. You know, certainly attacking the day in my own way. But Jeff's texting me at like 5:30 in the morning to be like, hey, I just want you to know Valdine Sohn's coming in at 11 a.m. tomorrow, which I'm grateful for that information. He's kind to do that. I really appreciate that. But that's still pretty early to be sending a text. You know, listen, if Jeff's going to be texting me at 5:30 in the morning about a recruit, that guy better turn into Jalen Carter. So that's all I'm going to say. But, yeah, looking forward to Valdine Sohn tomorrow. That would certainly be a big one. Bill Camacho says we're edging closer to the start of the season. You better believe that's the case. We know we are as well, because our buddy Will Dickerson's in here saying, time to be alpha dogs. As he says, only alpha dogs need apply. Checking in from Trenton, Georgia. You love that. Cody BMW MC in here at DawgNation.com in our chat today. That's great to see. Randy Hall making the prediction that Texas may get Derek Cooper on Sunday. Seems like that's probably the case. Seems like that's probably where all this is going here right now. I would say that's a pretty reasonable prediction. And by the way, you also know it's not quite, as big of a deal around here because, people who've been wearing suits all week, all of a sudden now they're wearing shirts and jeans. A lot of the folks who've been dressed up for the first 3 days are clearly wearing sort of a getaway day outfit today. So a lot going over there at DawgNation.com. Let me check in on YouTube here for a moment. We'll kind of find out how they are doing. As I said, two great guests coming up for us today. We had a chance to catch up with the SEC Network's Peter Burns. That will be for you here today. You'll like that. And our interview with Georgia quarterback Gunner Stockton here today. That is a fun one, too. Stockton, we got something here? All right, so we also have this from Eli Drinkwitz. Oh, Lord. So Drinkwitz mentions, do I dare say this? So Drinkwitz, Eli Drinkwitz, during his media day scrum, has made mention of the Epstein files. I think that's about as far as I'm going to go. But as far as I'm going to go with that. But if you want to know, how we're sort of dragging to sort of the bottom of the barrel here for topics on day 4 of media days, you've got Drinkwitz mentioning the Epstein files, and we're just going to leave that at that. We're not going to go any deeper than that. But apparently, Elijah Drinkwitz wanted to here a moment ago. Let us see what else. Mike said BA's wife was probably like, who's texting you at this hour? Yeah, unfortunately for both of us, we're already kind of up and at 'em in that particular moment. Busy days around the Adams household. So my wife's getting up, getting ready to go too. So, we are very alert in our home very early. So no startling necessarily, but there's something about our human condition where if you get a text at a time you're not expecting a text, somehow you assume it's bad news. I don't really quite know what that says about us as people, but it sort of feels like that's kind of true. Chef Jay Bowen says today's the lesser teams at media days. Seems that way, although I've told you before, I think that Missouri could be set up to be better than expectations this year. So from that standpoint, they're interesting to me. They've very easy schedule. I think Pribula coming over at quarterback could at least be interesting. I don't know how good he's going to be, but at least interesting. Arkansas is always fun. Like, we have always been very clear about this. We openly root for Arkansas to win football games. Like, it makes me happy when they win because I like Sam Pittman so much. I think he's done a good job there. Arkansas just seems like pretty good people. I think overall I just sort of like Arkansas. So I like Pittman. I think the Kentucky vibe could be weird today because I don't think any of them like each other. That's pretty strange. And, A&M is here, and we'll see what kind of fanfare they bring with them. And that kind of bumps into what I told you before. And we're going to get more into this later on. Like, there's a pretty big story around A&M right now that's probably not true, but still big enough to generate a good bit of discussion, and we shall do that here in a minute. Thomas T-Bone 86 checking in to say, BA, hello, go Dogs. Hello, right back to you, Thomas. Glad you're here. Did I watch the All-Star game on Tuesday? I watched a good bit of it. I did go to sleep, though, before the kind of penalty kick style swing off at the end. I actually think that's a really fun idea. I think that baseball sometimes is guilty of being a little too try-hard. I think that baseball has listened to the wrong kinds of consultants, that somehow they're this desperate sport that has to make the bases bigger and the games shorter and all this kind of stuff. I don't think the actual situation for baseball is as desperate as they have been told that it is, and these, panicked leaders, paranoid leaders will just sort of believe anything, I guess. I don't think the situation for Major League Baseball is dire. A lot of what it has done has reeked of desperation and kind of stupid, silly. But the swing on for the All-Star game is actually pretty fun. That was actually, I think, kind of nice. Christopher Shore mentioning that when Steve Sarkisian made his appearance at Media Days early this week, when he walked to the podium, they always play the fight song, and they played the wrong fight song. They played the Texas A&M fight song. And the point we made last night, I was hanging out with Kaylee and Mike during our special Media Days coverage brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, is it's very telling to me that, look, if Billy Napier had been walking to the podium and Rocky Top would have played, everyone would have known that was the wrong song. If Kalen DeBoer walks to the podium and Glory to Old Georgia is playing, everybody would know that's the wrong song. It is really telling to me, it's 10 a.m., I got to get ready to start, really telling to me that when Sarkisian walks out to the wrong song in that room, nobody really knows. Texas fans know, A&M fans would know, but the rest of the league doesn't really know. What that leads me to say is it sort of feels like we're getting away from what in the SEC has truly been a conference. Teams from the same region of the country with the same viewpoint on life, shared experiences, teams that were united by geography and the kind of ways of life that have defined this region of the country. Now, what the SEC seems to be becoming is just a conglomeration of shared economic interests. That's not the same thing. But when the wrong fight song plays and nobody knows, that means we're essentially in a league that starts to feel more like strangers as opposed to the kind of, even if it was sort of like feuding cousins, the sort of familial kin of the SEC of the past. I think that's something this league ought to be concerned about. I'm not sure that it is. Anyway, though, it is 10 a.m., time for us to get rocking and rolling here today. So much to do. So let's tell you all about it. Let's, for the last time here at Media Days, fire up that animation. Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. What has been for us a very successful run through SEC Media Days concludes today, but we're going to do it in style with a very big show on the way. We've got two great guests for you. How about Georgia quarterback Gunner Stockton with us on today's show? We recorded this on Tuesday. We will play it for you today. Hope you get ready to enjoy that. The SEC Network's Peter Burns is also here today, too. Our buddy G. Grace in the YouTube comment section says, I can't wait to hear Peter Burns talk about the SEC going through Texas, something that Burns obviously said earlier this offseason. Well, to all of you who may remember, we made a very big deal about that on our show. Of course, we brought that up with Peter Burns, and you will hear that in the interview that we'll have for you here today. In addition to that, whatever sadness we felt about Georgia recruiting was, at least to a degree, short-lived, because yesterday Georgia also got, we think, a very impressive commitment. And we're going to talk about why it matters, what Georgia fans should like about it, and why whatever kind of hand-wringing, and I participate this just as much as you do because I'm in many ways just like so many of you, whatever hand-wringing we had about all of that, well, maybe we don't quite have quite as much room for doing that as sometimes we think we do. We'll have a really interesting and fun recruiting conversation off the top of the program today. So what do you say we get it started? By the way, our normal Thursday guest, Terrence Edwards, not able to be with us today, so we'll catch up with Terrence here again very soon, too. So what do you say we get it all started? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There was a line that Kirby Smart used a little earlier this offseason that I thought was really funny. Kirby's got a pretty good dry sense of humor, and he delivers things in a very sort of deadpan way. I sometimes find it to be kind of funny, whether he's intending to be or not. And he was talking about some sort of complaint he had. I honestly sort of forget what it was, transfer portal or something. I think it was a timing related to the transfer portal for the teams trying to win a national championship, the fact that the portal was opening up while they were doing that. I think that's what it was. And Smart, sort of in a deadpan way, revealed to reporters that when he complained about that, he was told, hey, there's no crying from the yacht. In other words, you've got things so well, you're living this, wonderful life. Georgia's this premier program. You were essentially, kind of living the lifestyle of the rich and famous on the yacht and things like that. So you don't get to complain about transfer portal because you've got it so good. That's what Smart said. And I was thinking about that because I think for all of us, there's an aspect of that that's true. Yesterday we spent a good bit of time talking about what had been the day prior on Tuesday, a pretty bad day for Georgia recruiting. And that's true, full stop. Georgia lost out on Tyler Atkinson after recruiting him for years, and lost out on James Johnson, the defensive lineman, after having him as a commit for like 2 weeks. It was, for two different reasons, two different guys, sort of a bad day for Georgia recruiting. And it kind of generates sometimes people would say the most tired conversation around Georgia, but one that's going to exist no matter what, the what's wrong with Georgia recruiting. When you lose out on a commit you had, when you lose out on a target you had prioritized, it allows people to say what's wrong with Georgia recruiting. And I don't think in all ways a question like that is necessarily rhetorical. As I told you yesterday, you got to have elite defensive linemen, and that's becoming a pretty pricey proposition. And those are pretty cutthroat competitions from a recruiting standpoint. You got to be at your best in terms of your sales pitch to get those guys. When you lose out on them, I do think it leads to a crucial question of, okay, well, how do we get these guys other than spending big for them? Because clearly some programs are looking to spend big. I think that's a real question. It's one that Georgia needs to find the answer to, and I trust that they will. Similar type of thing for Tyler Atkinson of, well, gosh, when one of the biggest players in your state has been among top priorities for years, and after taking what seems like a million visits to you, takes one visit to a place like Texas, and all of a sudden he's gone to Texas. Boy, what does that mean, and how do you deal with that, and how do those of us, this is maybe the thing that probably feels a little bit more, I think, emotional and top of mind, how do those of us who like following recruiting, like how do we make sense of the kind of regular beats and rhythms of the plot lines just not quite being what they used to be. All of that seems really real, and the conversation around that seems really justified. But there is also an element for those of us who talk about this for a living, or those of us who enjoy kind of discussing this with our friends as our favorite pastime. There is also a degree to which all of us are sort of crying from the yacht when we address these sorts of issues, because even in the midst of what was, objectively speaking, full stop, sort of a bad day for Georgia recruiting yesterday, there is still, in the immediate aftermath of that, some very good news to be had. Georgia got a very good commitment yesterday to, I think at least for now, bring an end to the really unpleasant conversation that had been happening after the aftermath of Tuesday and Atkinson and Johnson getting away. You already know it's the four-star linebacker Nick Abrams from Maryland, and you also probably already know this too. There is a lot to like about Abrams, and I'm not trying to tell you that means that Tyler Atkinson doesn't matter or James Johnson doesn't matter. Y'all, we really try not to lie to you or spin some sort of narrative. Like we really try to be just as straightforward and candid as we can possibly be. We do our best to do that. I'm not trying to tell you that you should completely forget about Atkinson or forget about Johnson. I'm simply saying that as a Georgia fan, if the worst thing you have to endure is a couple of recruiting losses on the way to another big win, yesterday with Abrams, perhaps tomorrow with Valdine Sohn, then those of us who care about this topic, we're all living a pretty good life. Can we agree with that? That if this is as bad as it gets, then things ultimately just aren't that bad as it relates to Georgia recruiting, which I think kind of leads to the next phase of all of this conversation. The fact that in the midst of the commitment of Abrams, I think there is a lot to like, not just about him as a player. I think there's a lot to like about why Abrams committed to Georgia. And as a lead-in to that, as a way of sort of getting to that from Abrams, I want to go back and hear Kirby Smart for a minute. Let's go back to his appearance at SEC Media Days on Tuesday when Smart was, once again, this is a big theme. We played some of this audio already for you this week, but this is kind of a different one of those, making it very clear about the kinds of players that he's seeking out. And in the very matter-of-fact terms that Smart uses, I think the one thing that you become aware of pretty quickly is this sort of sales pitch simply won't be for everybody. It's candid, it's fascinating, it's Kirby Smart at his most Kirby Smart-like. This is him from Tuesday talking about the kinds of recruits they're seeking out. Here's Kirby.
Let's just get the ones that care, the ones that are not transactional, that are relationship built. They want relationships. They want to be coached. They want to be pushed. And yeah, they're going to get paid. No coach is going to stand up here and say they don't want players to get paid. We want them to get paid. I am completely comfortable with that. What I want is them want to get paid and that not change how they go about their business. That not change if they're sensitive to being demanded excellence of. And it's so ironic to me that you meet a parent and they're like, Coach, I really want my son to play where he's pushed and demanded of, and he gets coached each and every day the hard way, because I honestly don't think he can make it without that. I mean, we all needed it. I needed it at 17. A 17-year-old needs to be pushed. Doesn't preclude them from gaining monetary value. They can do both those two things. But a lot of coaches aren't willing to do that. People don't want to confront and demand anymore for fear of losing a player. I would rather go get the right player that buys into that, and then I got something special when they do develop and get all those reps.
Look, in life, everybody's got their faults. I have mine, you have yours. I think sometimes you probably notice from me that one of the things that probably aggravates people a little bit is I have a tendency to be kind of corny. I have a tendency to be a little bit sentimental, and that's probably true. That's a fault of mine, probably. I don't know if it's a fault necessarily, but it can be one of those sort of personality traits that not everybody thinks is positive. How about we say it that way? But one thing I'm not is cynical. You know what I'm saying? Like there's the opposite side of that coin is someone who's like really, really cynical. And for the most part, especially when it comes to things that I like, I'm not particularly cynical. So as the sort of corny, sentimental person who hears Kirby Smart saying that really works on me. I mean, I really like that of, hey, man, we want to be here to help develop these 17-year-olds. We want to kind of find the guys who want that, who seek that out, who know they need it, who have parents that come from families who also know that they need that. That's what they want. And as someone like me, boy, that really works. There is, though, a group of people out there, and a lot of these people exist within the media for whatever reason, who sort of have the opposite personality traits. And they would say in a cynical fashion of, well, Kirby, good luck finding that. Recruits who want to buy into that and want to take less money and work hard and, be about development, good luck finding that. They would say that the message that Smart is trying to push there is too old-fashioned. It doesn't work in this age in which we live now. And as I told you yesterday, the truth is never 100% of what you want it to be, that there may be a degree to which that kind of mostly works. But when it comes to premium positions like defensive line and things like that, does that work for every single recruit at every single position, including the premium positions? Well, we're going to find that out over the course of the next couple of years. That's obviously true. But the one thing, those of us who are Georgia fans, once again, that we can take some comfort in is the fact that as tough of a sale in this modern age as that sounds like from Kirby Smart, we know that it's mostly working because of the recruiting success that Georgia has. And in many cases, what the recruits who commit to Georgia eventually sign with Georgia and show up to get this development that Kirby Smart says he promises them, that process continues to play out. We know this is, for Georgia, mostly working. And that's why you're going to really like what Nick Abrams said about what it was that kind of attracted him to Georgia. And it's interesting how closely what Abrams says mirrors what Kirby Smart says they're seeking out with the kinds of players they want to bring in. So Abrams made his commitment announcement from up in his home state of Maryland with 24/7 Sports yesterday. If you want to watch the full interview that 24/7 did with Abrams, you can go to their YouTube page, see the whole thing. In fact, I think you probably should. It's worth your time. But one aspect of that interview was Abrams telling the staff from 24/7 why it is that he wanted to come to Georgia. And boy, listen to this with your own ears. Doesn't this sound exactly like what Kirby Smart says they're seeking out? This is Abrams with 24/7 Sports from yesterday.
So I say a big thing for me was the development part. Coach Schumann, like I said before, Coach Schumann and Coach Smart coaching 3 Buckets Award winners, and then having multiple first-round draft picks, multiple successful linebackers in the NFL, and then from a different side, kind of the academics too. The Terry School of Business is one of the best public business schools in the country. So, although I'm also getting the great play on the field, I'm going to get coached to the best, the highest standard. But then I'm also going to be challenged in the classroom. So that was another big thing for me.
I mean, that is exactly the script you would write for a guy coming to Georgia if you could write it. And Abrams says it so clearly. This is what attracts him to Georgia. It was the thing at SEC Media Days that Kirby Smart says they're seeking out here right now. And, y'all, I'm not trying to pull the wool over your eyes. I'm not trying to, to use a phrase we used earlier this week, I'm not trying to gaslight you. I'm not trying to make anything up here. Of course, you have a right to be disappointed when Georgia lost James Johnson, when Georgia didn't get Tyler Atkinson. Of course, that's the case. But it's also possible to have concurrent thoughts, and concurrent to your disappointment there, I think you've got to really like a guy like Nick Abrams, and I think you really probably should love the reason why he commits to Georgia. And the fact that this sort of fits into kind of the theme of recent Georgia recruiting classes and the way that Georgia's winning with the kinds of players who want to be at Georgia. The self-selection process that's taking place of players getting to pre-decide before entering. Is this the grind that I want to be a part of? Is this the hard work that I want to commit to? Is this the long-term delayed gratification that I want to have define my life over the course of the next 3 to 4 years? We have other evidence that is largely working for Georgia. Our friends over at On3 put out an interesting graphic. Pete Nakos, I guess, somehow, some way compiled this data that when you look at the 10 biggest spenders in college football right now, you won't see Georgia among that top 10. Let me show you this on the screen. You'll get a chance to see it. As Nakos describes, no surprise here, Texas is number one, despite the fact that Steve Sarkisian said the nonsense at the podium this week that he said. Texas still number one, ahead of Texas Tech. Cody Campbell and his billions of dollars being thrown around. Then Ohio State, which bought a title last year. Oregon, that would love to, but somehow can't. Texas A&M, which I don't know, at one point in time had the slice. What was it? Sliced bread. Was that his name? Sliced bread. The message board commenter. They had the sliced bread money. Miami, USC, Michigan with the Oracle money. Tennessee with the what's the Pilot Flying J money, and then Auburn coming in at number 10. You don't see Georgia in that top 10. And some people, I think, have sort of an incorrect viewpoint on that. That if you're a Georgia fan and you see Pete Nakos, who we trust, good reporter, compiling this data, the top 10 biggest spenders in college football right now, and Georgia fans are like, oh, no, our team's not one of the top 10 biggest spenders. Let me tell you why, though, I don't think that's a bad thing, and actually it's probably a good thing. Is because if the way you're trying to do it now ends up not working, you can always try to go copy these other programs and start at least trying to spend just as big as they are. That if you ever get as desperate as Texas is, or as desperate as Texas A&M is, or as desperate as Miami is, programs that haven't, in Texas A&M's case, never had relevance, or in the case of Texas Miami, hasn't had true national championship relevance in a couple of decades. If you ever get as desperate as they are, you can always just simply copy what they're doing right now. But it's worth pointing out, it's always going to be very hard for these other programs to ever copy you. The idea of we're selling commits and recruits on doing what's hard. We're selling them on delaying gratification. We're selling them on committing to development. Abrams, in his own words, also mentioned academics. How many other programs do you ever even hear use the word academics anymore? We're selling our recruits on something far more substantial than just who's offering the biggest payday. To try that and actually have it work, and at Georgia we have evidence that it's working largely to a pretty significant degree, that's the sort of thing that you just can't copy, because if anybody could copy it, everybody would, because, of course, it's just a better way of doing business. That's why so many other programs, including Steve Sarkisian, give lip service to doing business that way. But we have enough counterexamples to know that's not quite the situation at other places. But at Georgia, for the most part, that's still the case. Now, it doesn't work with every recruit in every situation, and it may cause some problems for you at the true premium positions where they become pretty pricey propositions. That's real, and we're not going to avoid or deny what reality is. But at the same time, Georgia recruiting is still humming along pretty well. And a commitment from Nick Abrams, a 4-star linebacker, and his own stated reasoning for why he chose Georgia seems like pretty significant evidence of that. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. Happy you are with us. Live on video today, 10 a.m., final day for us at SEC Media Days. You know, the video shot all week long has been the podium. It's been pretty quiet on the main floor today. I'm just telling you, it's a very different vibe around here. It's sort of the final day of your trade show, if you've ever done that within your profession. People are packing up. I mean, like literally, like there have been like these radio row positions all week that have been manned and filled, and people have just kind of gone home. It's really a remarkable act of disrespect to Missouri and Kentucky and Arkansas and Texas A&M, some of the programs who are still here today, not quite getting the same media love. But nonetheless, we're rolling on and providing you plenty of coverage. 2 great guests coming out from us today. I'll tell you more about that. But first, let me thank my friends at Merriweather and Tharp who've made all this possible. Not just today, but they've been a big part of our Media Days coverage all week, too. Thrilled about that. I love Bob Tharp, his wife Ashley, their family, and our friends from Merriweather and Tharp, Jason, the entire team over there. Just good people who are doing good work. Now, that doesn't mean that divorce is a good thing necessarily. It's a scary and confusing thing for so many of you. And once again, you know, I don't shy away from saying that. Of course, if you kind of view that as an obvious and unavoidable next step in your life, there's some real anxiety, anxiousness that comes up because of that. Confusing, and you've probably got tons of questions, and obviously I don't have the wisdom or the knowledge about the law to answer those for you, but our friends at Meriwether and Tharp do. And if you've got questions about the divorce process, you can reach out to them today. You can find them online, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. And that website is really kind of a well-earned moniker for our friends at Meriwether and Tharp right now, because they now have offices, as you now know, all across the state. Think about Athens, Peachtree City, Carrollton, a brand new office there in Columbus. And the great success they've had helping people through one of the most challenging times they'll ever be forced to endure has allowed them to grow, has allowed them to put new offices in new communities and serve people there the same way they've been serving people in the Atlanta area for us going back about a decade's worth of time we've spent together here on our show. I'm really thankful for that. So I want you to find them online one more time, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That is GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com, and find out why Meriwether and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. We're happy to have them on our show today here, DawgNation Daily, and as a part of our SEC Media Days coverage all week long. So, speaking of that, before we're done today, I'm going to tell you why, even though it's kind of quiet and sleepy around here, believe it or not, arguably speaking, the biggest story of Media Days could actually play out before our eyes right now, here today. You may not know about this, but we'll tell you why. There could actually be an interesting series of questions and answers that comes out of this today involving one team in the SEC. We'll give that to you here coming up in a little bit. Also, I'm really thrilled about this. In a few minutes' time, you'll also get a chance to hear my interview from Tuesday with Georgia quarterback Gunner Stockton. A chance to sit down with Gunner. It was a privilege for me to be able to do that. Gunner was as charming with me as he was with everybody else. You will like this from him. We'll give that to you here coming up in just a couple of moments. But before that, let's go around the doghouse presented today by our friends at Daytona Beach, and let's give you another interview that we were able to do. Now, I like this guy. I find him to be good on television, but there was an issue we had earlier this offseason. If you're a regular listener, viewer to our program, you know this, with the SEC Network's Peter Burns. Peter on his radio show saying that, what was the exact phrase here? Somehow the SEC now runs through Austin, Texas, and not Athens, Georgia, who, as you know, beat Texas twice, stands as the reigning SEC champion. People seem to forget about that. For at least a brief moment, it seems like our buddy Peter Burns seemed to forget about that too. We like Peter. He was kind enough to spend some time with us. We sort of chided him about that statement from earlier this offseason. So as a part of Around the Doghouse, presented by Daytona Beach today, why don't you listen to me with the SEC Network's Peter Burns. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro, happy to have from the SEC Network, Peter Burns. Peter, feels like just right here once again, getting ready to start this season, and already a lot of energy around SEC Media Days. What's day one been like for you?
As long as I don't have to hang out with Mike Griffith, I'm in good shape. So, this is already a win for me in my book. I'll tell you, this feels like a different, newer version of Media Days than we've ever had. And the reason why I say that is that it feels like ever since 2020, there's always been something just huge going on, whether it was the pandemic, or then it was realignment, then it was Texas and Oklahoma's first year, then it was transfer portal, the House settlement, all that BS. And then finally, this is the first time in a long time, Brandon, I feel like we're talking about football. The problem is nobody really knows what the hell the rosters are right now because there's so much churn. I mean, we're talking about Ole Miss having 4 returning starters. I mean, this is wild right now.
So when you look at Georgia, they're among 3 teams the highest projected win total, but it still feels a little bit different, I think, for some people because Georgia's they won the SEC, but not coming off a deep advance of the college football playoff. Where do you feel like Georgia fits into kind of the larger conversation happening around the SEC right now?
I mean, rightfully where they are. I mean, that's the crown, right? I mean, you talk about what Kirby has built ever since he really went on that run is that he's going to put himself in a position to play in this city for the SEC championship game. Now, that also kind of depends at some point, like, hey, how's the quarterback play? How healthy are you? How much do these transfers actually matter? I mean, you go back and look at the wide receiver issue right now. I mean, like every single game we sat there and go, all right, how many drops is it going to be? And I know you guys and your fans have talked about it ad nauseum, but we'd be in the studio and Benjamin Watson's like, are you kidding?
Mm-hmm.
Like, he would never curse. He's too good of a human to do that.
Of
but
course.
And so I think you've put yourself in the mix. And I covered the Denver Broncos for 4 years in when I was out there. And the idea was never going to be who is by far the best. It was, or do you have a good enough team to get into the playoff? And once you got into the playoff, could you win it? And there's no doubt with the foundation that Kirby has built and the recruiting, I mean, he's crushing it once again, shockingly, that they put themselves in that position.
Now, of course, we did have to give you a little grief early in the summer because of on the radio show. What was the line that the SEC
so become an idiot. I don't remember. I got
runs
a sword.
through
I'm like
Austin?
a quarterback, right? You're like, you get burned once, you don't forget about it.
Well, if you're like
But-
me, you also say so much over the course of a summer. By the time we get to the end of the summer, who
Yeah.
knows what said what? But
Yeah.
it is interesting because
But what I said real quick, it was
Yeah.
about that I thought that the road through the SEC went through Texas. And a lot of that had to do with because of what I've seen Sark offensively have built there, and it felt really more of the quarterback situation. Now, I've seen a little bit of Gunner. Kirby's seen a whole lot more than I have. But at the same point, I felt like there was going to be more offensive success over at Texas than I thought that there was going to be with Georgia this
Well,
year.
I'll tell you what's interesting. You go back a couple of years ago, Georgia and Texas had almost no history with each other. They were essentially strangers, right?
Not
And yet
anymore.
You played twice last
Yep.
year. You've got at least one game on deck for this year. You can kind of go pretty quickly to suddenly there feels like there's a little bit of a rivalry here because both teams obviously
Sure.
aspire to a national championship. I was at both games a year ago. Incredible level of intensity. That is kind of some of the fun of the new SEC, where you take these big macro brands, throw them on a field together, and pretty soon you've got a pretty interesting storyline that starts to play
Well, and
out.
it was, and it still is to a certain extent, Georgia and Alabama. But when you add the element of nobody wanted Texas to win in their first year of this conference, every other team was like, well, we don't like Texas, but we actually will probably still want to pull for Georgia right at that
I've had
aspect
opposing
of it.
fans come up and basically say thank you for not letting Texas, even though I obviously not playing the game.
Because you got to earn it, right? Like you got
That-
to pay your dues.
I think a lot of people like the idea of a legacy SEC team winning the SEC in Texas' first year. I think that was real, Peter.
I don't hate it. And one of those things, too, is I will say this. They run their programs very differently, but they're also obsessive about success. And what I mean by that is I've been in Kirby Smart's office or in the hallways in Athens when Shane Beamer was a special teams coach for him. I was in there, Brennan, in the middle of March one time, and I'm visiting Shane, and we're just BSing. Nothing's going on, no practice or whatever. And Kirby just makes a beeline, okay, right over to where we're at. And I'm thinking he's coming to say hello. No. He's like, Shane, we need to go take a look at the field goal protection on this, and this. And I'm like, buddy, this is March the 15th. And I remember when I would go to practice, we would, mic up Kirby for all of these kind of SEC inside and these things. We couldn't use 97% of the footage. God damn, get this guy off the field. He's the worst, blank. But you realize he ran his program a certain way, and it was obsessive. And he learned that from Nick Saban, and that's why Kirby's the best coach in all of football right now. Sark does it in a different way, but it's that still amount of that attention to detail it's kind of just the offensive version of Kirby is Sark, and you see Kirby being Kirby.
I'll let you go on this. For Georgia fans this year, probably the biggest home schedule of my lifetime, right? Alabama comes in, Ole Miss comes in, Texas comes in. But it's that Alabama game in September. People know the backstory here. Obviously, the dramatic game a year ago that the comeback for Georgia fell a little bit short. How big is that one for Georgia this year? You don't want Kalen DeBoer to get a second win on you as he tries to build his program in Tuscaloosa. And plus, just what has kind of been the nemesis standing in Georgia's way. How big do you view that Alabama game for Georgia in late September?
I mean, not as big as I view the Texas game, believe it or not, because I think that it was always more about Saban and Kirby than it was Georgia and Alabama. And albeit I know what happened last year, but that was such a fluky game for so many different reasons. But, so I look at it as like, to me, if I'm Georgia, the new Alabama is Texas right now. And that's going to be the litmus. But still, the new Georgia is still going to be Georgia. I mean, that's still going to be the gold standard of it right now. And the conference itself is still going to be the gold standard of it. I mean, listen, I know we're going on a 2-year drought, but there's also, I think, 2, maybe 3 if you add Penn State with the way that they brought back Drew Allard this year. I think there's 3 teams in the Big Ten. I think there's 6 teams that could compete for a title here in the conference.
You're doing great work on TV, SEC Network, also the radio as well. Remind folks how they can see you guys, all the stuff you got going on this week.
Yell at me on Twitter or Instagram at Peter Burns ESPN, especially when I say dumb things like Texas runs through the SEC. So.
Georgia fans have rabbit ears, you know that.
Good. You know what? Hold us accountable for that. That's what makes this conference the best. That's why we have so many damn people covering it.
Peter Burns, SEC Network. Fun stuff there with Peter Burns as part of Around the Doghouse, presented today by Daytona Beach. And speaking of fun, if you want to have some fun here this summer, not too late to get that vacation plan for you at Daytona Beach and take advantage of 23 miles of shoreline, the international airport that goes right to it. Look, you need a beach vacation, and maybe if you're like me, you got a lot of family stuff going on, things like that. You get busy. You perhaps have not taken the right time to kind of plan this, but at Daytona, still going to be an option for a great resort, great hotel. There's all kinds of incredible savings here right now, too. And if you'll check out the website, you can learn more about this. It's DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. That's DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. Daytona Beach is renowned for its restaurants. You like golf and fishing and all the things to do outdoors when you're at this wonderful coastal beach location. Well, Daytona's got all of that. You've probably grown up knowing about it because of the Great American Race. But listen, motorsports is not the only thing going on when it comes to Daytona Beach. In fact, you owe it to yourself to find out more about it by taking that visit. I grew up going there, Ponce Inlet Lighthouse and the Main Street Pier and all of those landmarks that are just sort of etched in my mind and memory forever. And you can make your own memories at Daytona Beach here this summer. So find out more. DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. That is DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals for more on that today. All right, so we told you before we're done today, I'm going to tell you why perhaps the single biggest story of SEC Media Days could actually play out today. We'll also talk about a little bit of a continuation of the kind of Cold War between the Big Ten, the SEC. This time it's the Big Ten sort of firing a shot in the SEC's direction. We'll tell you about that here coming up in a minute. But earlier this week, I had a tremendous privilege, my chance to sit down with Georgia quarterback Gunner Stockton. He's mild-mannered. He's certainly not trying to be anything that he's not, but he's also very comfortable in his own skin, very proud of his teammates, thankful for his chance to represent Georgia here at Media Days, and totally oblivious to any of the criticism or the things being said around Georgia this offseason. Gunner doesn't have his eyes on any of that. He is focused straight ahead on the season that's ahead, and he told us that earlier this week here as a part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And here on Dog Nation, happy to have Georgia quarterback Gunner Stockton stopping by. And after what has been a busy day for you here thus far, at least I would imagine it has been, quarterbacks always get a lot of attention. New quarterbacks get even more attention than that. What has media days been like for you here now?
It's been great. Just being able to kind of be myself and just talk about the team. And it's a cool part, just being here on their behalf has been awesome.
And really, in a lot of ways, what you went through in New Orleans, I'm talking about leading your first start and the size of having a media throng that was gathered around you that day. By comparison, I mean, this may not be quite as big as that was because that's a playoff game. That's you're kind of thrust in that moment. So you may have actually faced even more questions that day, maybe, than you are even right now,
I think
right?
So, a little bit more. It was a little bit different, but today's been great, and I've enjoyed it being here.
What did you learn about that first start, either about yourself or, what's happening on the field? What was your experience? What did you learn from that time on the field in that game?
I think it was just having to deal with the emotions of a game and just the ebbs and flows of it. And just because I hadn't played a game in a little bit since when I went in for the Texas game. But just having to get that back and just enjoying it and being around each other is the biggest thing as I learn, and just enjoying the moment.
Well, you bring up something I think is interesting. Like, obviously, I have no idea what it feels like to be a quarterback in the SEC, but I can certainly imagine it must be weird as a backup quarterback when you're standing there. And, you're, of course, you're going to be ready to go in the game, but also that's a moment that may never come. And in some seasons, the quarterback just stays healthy the entire time. I can only imagine what it must be like when you see Carson go down, and you're obviously concerned for his health, but then you realize this is my moment, and I got to go in here and help my team try to win an SEC championship. What's it like going from sidelines to kind of a heroic performance when you would have woken up that morning having no idea that was on the way for you?
It was crazy. When Carson went down, I didn't really know, if he was going to be okay or not. And going into halftime, it was probably midway through halftime. We've been sitting there, and Coach Bo was like, "Hey, you're up. Carson's down." And it was just, like I said, the emotions and everything, dealing with it was experience and a good moment. But it was just, looking back, it was a neat moment and experience to be able to go through that.
And, of course, the one thing from the game that everybody remembers is courageous play by you. You keep the football. You scrambled for some yards. You took the big hit. You held on to the football. And I think that kind of leads to some curiosity about this season of how much do you want your legs? How much do you think Mike Bobo, this Georgia offense, do they want to utilize some of the mobility that you showed in that moment? How much of a part of your playing personality do you think that'll be for this season?
Yeah, I think a little bit. I think if you can run as a quarterback, it's always good, and being able to use your legs when you can. And that just comes with being smart and just knowing when you can and can't do it. So that's a big part.
And, of course, this is a Georgia offense that, in addition to bringing in a new quarterback, is also trying to figure some stuff out. Kirby Smart talked a lot during spring practice about wanting to be better when the team runs the ball. That's a point of emphasis that Smart's shared with fans and media. What's the path like to get that offensive improvement? What does that require from Georgia?
I think just being consistent and just showing up every day and doing what our coaches have told us, and just working hard. And the biggest thing is just being consistent, like I said, and just having fun while you do it.
Of course, you're very comfortable in your own skin. This type of media stuff does not seem to be a huge problem for you. You seem to handle it all in stride, and yet you also know that there's a very big conversation happening around Georgia football all the time, and there are big questions, and obviously some of that has kind of related to the Georgia offense. When you see criticism, when you see these big questions, when you see some people kind of wondering, hey, what's next for a team after you kind of get used to national championships in 2021 and 2022, and when that doesn't happen in 2023 and 2024, what do you think about some of the kind of just big topics and questions and criticism that kind of comes Georgia's way? And now you're kind of at the center of that. What's it like, I guess, to be a part of that conversation, whether you want to be or not?
Yeah, I think at Georgia you're always going to have a lot of critics and a lot of fans too. And but at Georgia we always try to just keep it inside the building and just kind of, I don't know if you put your blinders on, but just kind of, it's all about us. So that's been awesome at Georgia.
What do you think of Ryan Puglisi?
He's awesome. He's been a great friend, and since he's been here, we kind of hit it off when we first got here, and he's a great player and a great friend, like I said.
Of course, North Georgia kid and a kid from Connecticut, probably a little bit of a different background, maybe, I guess. Any kind of cultural divide that had to be bridged on that?
Yeah, we grew up. He went to a private school and a boarding school actually, and but it's a little different, but. He's awesome. He's a great guy.
You were at the Manning Passing Academy recently. That's a chance to rub elbows with a lot of the big quarterbacks in college football. Other quarterbacks have said, including a guy that I think you know, Jake Fromm, about how instrumental a moment like that was in their development. What was it like for you to be around other great quarterbacks at an event like that?
Yeah, it was great. Just getting to meet everybody and just cut it up and talk to them and. Just kind of see how everybody is, and it was a neat experience, and getting to see the Manning family and how they treat people and how they handle themselves was awesome.
There are 10 other quarterbacks in addition to you at SEC Media Days this week. Do you talk much with other SEC quarterbacks? Do you have much of a relationship with guys that are not at Georgia? I mean, very few people understand what it's like to be at a place like Georgia as the quarterback. Other SEC quarterbacks, though, would have similar experiences. How much of a relationship do you have with other quarterbacks?
I think that was the coolest part about the Manning Passing Academy. Just getting to talk to everybody. And, for example, Ty Simpson, I hadn't really talked to him a lot since we went to a camp at Alabama together and, when we were in high school. And it was just cool getting to kind of catch up and talk about everything that's happened. So it was pretty special.
I'll finish with this. Georgia is breaking in and introducing a kind of a new crop of receivers this year. I think it's 7 new receivers in total. Obviously, the 2 transfers, Zachariah Branch, Noah Thomas. You've got incoming freshmen, guys that have gotten attention like Talon Taylor, C.J. Wiley. There are others. Those are some of the names that get the most attention. As you've been working this summer, establishing chemistry with these guys, or just sort of watching them go through summer workouts, are there receivers for you that have stood out, and are there guys that either because of their work ethic or just their sheer ability that kind of stand out in your mind as you get ready to go into fall camp?
I think, like you were saying, the receivers, they came in. There's a bunch of new guys, and guys that have been there for a long time, and just the way they go attack every day and show up to work, and they aren't complaining, or always have a positive attitude, and it's hard to do to be consistent, like I said earlier. But they make it easy to go and play and work out and do all the stuff that ain't too fun. They make it easy. So.
You have a goal for yourself or your team this year?
I think obviously at Georgia you want to win every game, and that's the best thing about being at Georgia. That's the standard. So that's the privilege, and I look forward to just enjoying every moment with the guys and just embracing it.
Well, Gunner Stockton, it's a privilege to talk to you here today. Look forward to seeing how the season plays out. Thanks for spending some time with us.
Thank you.
Gunner Stockton there, Georgia quarterback, here as a part of SEC Media Days. Really interesting from Gunner Stockton, and when you hear him say, going to put the blinders on, not pay attention to the criticism, from him, I find that to be very believable. In sports, especially sometimes with coaches, not everyone who says they don't pay attention to the media actually refrains from paying attention to the media. That's just sort of the way that goes. But in the case of Stockton, if anyone was ever truly unplugged from all of this, it sort of seems like Gunner kind of might be that guy that he might really be able to tune this out. He's just not that into the hysteria around the quarterback position. He doesn't try to cultivate that cult of personality the same way that maybe others do. And I'm not even necessarily sure it's wrong that others try to do that. I'm not sure that is wrong, but Gunner clearly has a vibe that sort of works for him. He likes taking the humble approach. And when we realized that the best of Georgia involved a quarterback in Stetson Bennett who sort of fit into the picture, he wasn't the star of that team necessarily. He was heroic in big moments, of course, but he was always sort of one man in the midst of an ensemble cast. Even though Gunner is a very different quarterback than what Stetson Bennett is, it's easy to imagine that Gunner could perhaps fit into a similar role for Georgia here this season. With that said, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean here today. And, of course, I'll remind you.
Let's take a look.
There we go. We'll play a little music. Or perhaps not. Yeah, perhaps not. We'll get ready to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean here today and let you know it's a great time for you to be thinking about a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. It is especially a great time for you to be thinking about this time next April when DawgNation gets ready to set sail again for another DawgNation cruise. This is really the time to be thinking about getting ready for that. We're already booking just dozens of staterooms each and every week. Hundreds of people will be joining us. And so to make sure that there's space and availability for you, that you can make your plan on all of this, it's really the time to do that right now with our friends at Royal Caribbean. You want to make sure you do that. Our good friend Jessica Slater standing by to tell you all about Utopia of the Seas coming up next April. Your opportunity to be a part of a wonderful experience, going to Perfect Day Coco Cay, going to Nassau in the Bahamas. Don't forget, by the time our DawgNation cruise gets to Nassau next April, Royal Beach Club in Nassau, once again exclusively for those on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, that will be debuting. That will be ready to go. It'll be time for all of that. So think about our DawgNation cruise next April. You don't have to wait until April to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, but it's a great time to do that with us on board Utopia of the Seas for the next iteration of the DawgNation cruise. Our good buddy Jessica Slater, travel advisor, standing by to help you out with all this. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Okay, so it's day 4 of SEC Media Days. It's Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, Texas A&M who are on hand here today. And I don't know that people properly realize just how big of the story that could play out with Texas A&M. Now, admittedly, this is probably not going to happen, and I think some of the rumors around this are likely exaggerated, but nonetheless, it has been a hot topic of the last couple of days. I guess it starts because of a guy you may know, Bud Elliott, working for CBS Sports, saying on his podcast that he'd heard through the grapevine that Shemar Stewart, who you may know as the former Texas A&M Aggie, who was drafted in the first round by the Cincinnati Bengals. Within the NFL, the Bengals have a little bit of a notorious reputation for being among the stingiest franchises. Whether that's fair or not, I simply can't say. I don't live enough in the NFL world to know if that's fair or not, but that is the Bengals' reputation. Not exactly always the most generous in comparison to the other 31 NFL franchises. So Stewart's drafted in the first round. Normally, first-round draft pick contracts are a little bit of a formality. There's kind of a slotting that takes place. It's a lot of boilerplate language, typically speaking. But for whatever reason, and once again, this is sort of beyond my NFL knowledge to tell you why this is, there's some squabbling over some specific language related to, I think it's incentive clauses in Shemar Stewart's contract. So Stewart is currently held out, didn't participate in like the rookie OTAs and things like that. He is holding out as a first-round pick. We used to see first-round holdouts sometimes in the NFL. Seems like we just don't see that anymore, at least by my memory. We don't really see that anymore. But the Bengals, not always the most respected NFL franchise, have been at odds with their first-round pick, Shemar Stewart, and his holdout doesn't really show any signs of ending. So what Elliott says is that he heard that Shemar Stewart had been working out with Texas A&M, and that perhaps serious people in College Station were saying they thought that Stewart might try to attempt to actually come back to Texas A&M and basically reject the Bengals and go back to college and play for the Aggies this fall for what would you would assumably be a very high NIL deal. Now, if you're like me, when you first hear this, your question is probably the same as mine. Is this legal based on the rules? Well, no, it's not. There is no provision in college football right now for a guy going to the NFL and basically coming back to college after that. You can do that in other sports. You can't do that, though, in college football right now. But we've also seen plenty of instances in which players have just challenged the legality of some of the NCAA rules, and they have won in court by doing so. Diego Pavia did that with his eligibility just earlier this offseason. So there are those who believe that if Stewart really is at an impasse with the Bengals, he may try to do this, and perhaps he might win. I know Mike Florio, who is an attorney, also the author of Pro Football Talk, he wrote about this, suggesting this as, I guess, a legitimate possibility. Since then, we've also had some other reporting as well. Cincinnati Enquirer would obviously be closer to the Bengals than perhaps anybody, saying that while Stewart has been working out in College Station, it's probably an exaggeration to say that he's been working out with the team. There's a little bit of a degree of difference there. And we know this is true in Athens, too, where former players are always working out in Athens. Oftentimes, it's a super nice weight room these SEC programs have. So you perhaps would have a better opportunity to work out there than almost anywhere else you could go. Sometimes that's just the most attractive weight room to be in. But just because you're working out where the team is doesn't mean you're working out with the team. And perhaps that's also what's true for Shemar Stewart as well. And yet this rumor is still out there. My guess is it will be addressed today. And if Mike Elko, the Aggies coach, gives any life to this whatsoever, I think it kind of goes to the top of storylines for what has otherwise been a relatively bland edition of SEC Media Days here this week. Another topic that has been discussed some, thankfully not too much, is the ongoing turmoil between what the future of the college football playoff is going to look like and what feels like a little bit of a cold war between the Big Ten and the SEC. Back during spring meetings, the SEC really hammering the talking points related to strength of schedule and the fact that a lot of programs, including I think Kirby Smart himself saying this, in so many words, that the league's strength of schedule wasn't given proper deference in the college football playoff conversation last season. I think that's just objectively true. I do believe the SEC, in its overall strength as a league, was mishandled by the committee a year ago. You're not surprised to hear that. I certainly know that. But that is my feeling, and I do think the SEC did right by itself for arguing its point of view back in May. Because they said so much then, there just hasn't been as much need for kind of restating all of that now. And that's one of the reasons why I think there's been just a little bit less volume to the overall chatter of media days, because so much was already said at SEC spring meetings just a few weeks ago. Well, laying the groundwork for all of that, the Big Ten's media days take place next week. And as kind of, I guess, a sort of a lead into that, we've got reporting out there today, Ross Dellinger once again, who's kind of led the way on most of this, saying that when it comes to the future of the college football playoff, that the Big Ten will not agree to a 16-team playoff, and it won't agree to what the SEC wants, the lack of automatic qualifiers. The Big Ten won't move off its demand of at least 4 automatic qualifiers for its league unless the SEC is willing to go to a 9-game conference schedule. So the Big Ten says, hey, we're not cooperating with you in the playoff unless you add a 9-game conference schedule. Now, let me tell you why this bothers me, and you already know this. It has been proven with empirical data that the SEC's 8-game conference schedule is tougher than the Big Ten's 9-game conference schedule. Bill Conley, who knows the math part of this better than anybody from ESPN, wrote this in explicit terms. And yet, you still don't really hear that coming up. I'm not talking about from like SEC circles like this. I'm talking about from like supposedly objective voices within the national media. Why is there no fact-checking of this when it comes to this particular topic? I think it's one of the reasons why people are always saying, why is Tony Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner, why is he so quiet? Why doesn't he say more when the SEC is so loud and noisy in recent weeks? The point that I've made is I don't think Petitti feels like he needs to say anything, because for the most part the national media seems more than willing to do his bidding as it relates to the comparison of the 8-game and 9-game conference schedule, but also as it relates to the fact that the SEC, while playing an 8-game conference schedule, far more challenging than the Big Ten's 9-game conference schedule, also has a history of playing big non-conference games as well. For instance, Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, South Carolina, teams in the SEC every single season play their in-state conference, their in-state rival that happens to be in another conference. For this year, Georgia, the Georgia Tech game looks to be a pretty big game. For Florida, the game against Florida State in most years is a pretty big game. Louisville is every bit the program Kentucky is. Clemson has won 2 national championships. Other SEC teams, such as Alabama, LSU, and the like, they play big non-conference games to begin the season almost every year. Georgia, for the most part, has a habit of doing both. Tech at the end of the season, Clemson, Oregon, and the like at the beginning of the season. So once again, we're having the conversation of why won't the SEC go to the 8-game? Why won't the SEC go to the 9-game conference schedule? My question to that becomes, why won't anybody point out the SEC is already playing more difficult schedules and playing more power for opponents than the typical Big Ten team does anyway? I'll give you one more final point on that. There was some news this week you probably didn't notice, but it's worth your attention. Indiana, who a year ago made the college football playoff on the back of one of the softest schedules you'll ever see, truly an embarrassment, was supposed to play a home-and-home series against Virginia in like 2028 and 2029. I believe those were the years. This week, they bought out that series. And Indiana, who used a soft schedule to make the playoff this year, is replacing Virginia in a future year with Austin Peay. Now, let me tell you what you already know. If you're a Big Ten program and you're afraid of playing Virginia, then what are we even doing here? And why don't those facts get brought into consideration when the comparison's made between the Big Ten and the SEC schedules? Those seems like questions worth asking, and that is Cruising Around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And as we wrap it up for you here today, we'll do so with a golden shoe. I sit here for the final time at the College Football Hall of Fame in downtown Atlanta. And just down the road from where I am, here on Marietta Street, where the College Football Hall of Fame is located, State Farm Arena is also located at the end of this block, too. It was busy on Saturday with the WWE event known as the main event on Peacock streaming video. And it was the former Georgia Bulldog Bill Goldberg having his last match, taking the loss to Gunther, but nonetheless having his last match. Jermaine King writes in, Jermaine's a good friend of ours, saying, have you seen Goldberg's retirement speech? He also shouts out a guy named Justin Anthony for posting the video. Yeah, really nice speech, really good moment. I have heard since then that Goldberg, I guess, wasn't too happy with how the last match played out. I guess there's a little bit of controversy around that. But it was cool to see such a big crowd in Atlanta and such a big presence on the streaming platform for the WWE as the former dog Bill Goldberg had his last match. We'll give Jermaine King a golden shoe for pointing that out to us here today, and the lousy stinking Gators. I don't know if they'll play their last game this fall, but I'm sure they'd like to have it all come to an end against Georgia sometime soon. But when it comes to the winning streak, and by the way, Bill Goldberg knows something about streaks, we don't see this ending anytime soon. About 1,713 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back in studio tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them here today. By the way, one more broadcast to come from the SEC Media Day set that we've kind of put together here. Kaylee Manziel will be with our Cody Chavins tonight for a special edition of DawgNation at Large. By the way, we've got a coach speaking here right now. Is that Elko? Is that that's Mark Stoops there. Yeah, perhaps speaking at SEC Media Days for the final time. He's got some notes there in front of him, too. We can almost get down there and see what those notes say. We would think that Stoops is probably one of the more embattled coaches here right now. It seems like there's an odd situation in Lexington a bit. You know, he obviously wanted the A&M job. He was leaving to take the job. Fan revolt prevented him from getting it. Goes back to Kentucky. It just seems like both those sides, coach and program, fan base in the mix, they're all just a little tired of each other. So you kind of have to wonder, in what could be an off-season of turmoil on the way for SEC coaches going into 2026, is there any coach less likely to be here next year than Mark Stoops is for Kentucky? He speaks at the podium here right now, kind of an interesting shot of that. And as I was saying, Cody and Kaylee tonight, special edition of DawgNation at Large. It will stand as our final broadcast from our set here for SEC Media Days. Connor will also be a part of that, too. Excuse me, I apologize. Connor Riley also a part of that as well. So fun broadcast coming up later on this evening. We're looking forward to that. We're also looking forward to getting your comments here right now. I'll start back on DawgNation.com once again and get ready to get some here. DT says they better be afraid of playing Virginia in lacrosse. Yeah, perhaps they are. DT says there aren't objective voices in the media when it comes to the SEC. I'd say for the most part it seems true for me. I also have pretty thin skin about some of this kind of stuff. That may be true as well. But, you know, the point that I've made in the past is I think that the SEC is viewed nationally as a rural league. This is a league made up of small towns. Athens, Georgia is a very small town. College Station, Bryan, Texas, the sort of spot where A&M's located, very small town. Starkville, incredibly small. Auburn, Alabama, incredibly small. You've got some, I mean, obviously Austin's a big city, but Austin's not even a full-fledged member of the SEC yet as far as I'm concerned. Most of the SEC, especially the legacy SEC, made up of small towns. And the permanent revolution in kind of broadcast media is rural purged. There's always an attempt to make things a little bit more cityfied. And that's the divide here when it comes to the Big Ten in states where there's just a little bit more of a fan base that's a little bit more closely connected to cities. It's the urban versus rural divide that I think defines the SEC versus Big Ten debate. That's just the way that goes. So all of that kind of playing out here. Randy Hall wondering about the future of a chortle button. You never know, Randy. You never know what may happen. Garrison Duggar says, give me a defense to my coworkers that are, I believe this is Oklahoma State Big 12 guys, and say the SEC is no different. They claim that ESPN props up the SEC, and the top and middle is no different than the other Power 4. Well, I think the one thing the Big 12 does have going for it is, by comparison to the league that we most compare it to, the ACC, it is certainly deeper than the ACC. The top-end teams obviously are not the same. You know, a program like Clemson win a national championship. There's no team in the, in the Big 12 that has kind of the championship history that Clemson has in the last couple of years. But as far as your comparison to, like, the fact that your Big 12 friends think that the SEC is propped up by ESPN, look, the NFL draft on this just tells you everything you need to know. Look at the in most years, I'm talking about going back 4 years, the very small number of Big 12 players that get drafted at a very high level. This is not a league that has the same collection of elite talent. You know, people kind of talk about the SEC being so-called bigger brands than the Big 12, but what really is the difference is the level of talent. And that's not my opinion or your opinion or anyone's opinion. That's the proof by the NFL draft. There's just not tons of NFL guys playing in the Big 12 at certainly the same rate that there is in the SEC. It's one of the reasons why the Big 10 is now kind of trying to get itself onto the SEC's block a little bit more, because the Big 10 has produced in recent years a lot more draft picks. Not as many as the SEC, but certainly a lot more. And so, you know, that creates this situation where, you know, they do have a little bit more of a argument for making it competitive. In the Big 12, I mean, just especially in kind of a post-Texas Oklahoma world, just look how few players from that league actually get drafted. I think that sort of tells you everything you need to know.
So how's it going for Mark Stoops down there?
First question. I saw you laughing. I was curious.
First question off the bat. How motivated would you say you are, Coach?
Oh, no.
That's you talk about people ask the tough questions when they know they can.
Yeah.
Right? And, like, he has to defend that he's motivated about this season.
Sure. Yeah. So what Cody's referencing is that when a coach is on firm footing, there's a certain level of politics that plays out where I think there is a little bit of self-preservation that kind of clicks in with the media. It's like, how much do I really want to challenge this guy really if he's not going anywhere for the time being? But once the media starts asking, like, really pointed and tough questions, that's usually sort of the canary in the coal mine that, hey, things are not about – this coach may be in some real trouble, because the media just sort of gets a sense that the things are changing. I think you saw a tonal shift with, like, say, Mark Richt near the end of his time as the Georgia coach that let you sort of know that, oh, okay, this has a chance to go a different direction here. People just sort of, you know, power comes with an aura. And when that aura changes, people have a tendency to notice. And sometimes you see the questions change. And in the case of Mark Stoops, that's certainly an example of that. And the real issue here for Stoops at Kentucky is just fatigue. And both sides, I think, sort of have a point. Stoops' point is Kentucky's never been good. And they will likely, I'm not trying to take a shot here, this is not a jab, it's just the truth. They'll probably never be better than what Stoops has had them be. I don't know they can be better than what Stoops has had them at, but they'll never be better than what Stoops has had. I mean, in 2018, they played Georgia. You win that game, you go to the SEC championship. They got blown out, but still, they're one game away from the SEC championship. That is as good as it'll ever be. He's also, you know, had some winning records since then, too. And he's like, what do you people want from me? Like, how much more winning do you think you're really going to do? I would say that he's got a point. Conversely, Kentucky fans are just tired. You know, he had the thing, was it the beginning of last year, 2023? These years run together. It's amazing how true that is. Where during his radio show, he kind of got all over his fans like, listen, if y'all want to win more games, you got to start giving more money to the program. I'm telling you right now, Kentucky fans don't want to hear that of, you know, they're already disappointed, and now they're being blamed for why Kentucky's not winning more. They're tired of that too. So it's a little bit like, and maybe some of you have had relationships like this, where like both sides are just sort of tired of the other side. And that's a shame if it happens, but sometimes it's true. And I think Kentucky fans have a point. I think Stoops has a point. You've also got the weird thing related to the athletic director there, sort of irritated with him. when Calipari was the basketball coach. I would say that for a while, now people don't care because it's only Kentucky, but for a while, best soap opera in the SEC was probably at Kentucky. Because you had a situation for a minute there where football coach, basketball coach, athletic director, I think all three were not really getting along very well. Best soap opera in the SEC. It just so happened that it was Kentucky, so nobody really cared. All right, let me go over to YouTube for a little bit here. Chris Jacobs says the thing about Kentucky is they eventually put together a surprising season, but even had bad records, they play competitive. I mean, they had a first-round draft pick. How many other, so basically saying that even when they lose, they can somewhat be competitive. And I would say that for Kentucky, that has been true. They've given Georgia fits a lot. Georgia almost never covers the spread against Kentucky. A lot of that's because they typically play Kentucky prior to an off week. And listen, and you obviously should be very careful when it comes to gambling, but the one thing that you can kind of take to the bank on Georgia for a good long time is Georgia sleepwalks into a bye. Georgia never covers the spread prior to a bye week, just never happens. And a lot of those games have happened to come against Kentucky. Jonathan Aaron says, did I watch the ESPYs last night? I didn't. I saw some of the clips that got shared around, some of that, but I did not watch the ESPYs. I'm not really into award shows anymore. I guess there's probably not an award show that I watch anymore. I guess that's the case. Bo Molinari says that's a rough question. He says only worse one was what Jeff Lebby got about players leaving the program. Yeah, I'm guessing some of the tone around Lebby is probably not super positive either. But honestly, like, what do you do? I mean, I'm not sure what you do about that necessarily. I mean, pretty nondescript coach, kind of a nondescript program. And listen, I mean, a lot of that's just this general sadness of their coach, who was very notable, in an untimely fashion sort of path. I mean, they're still dealing with the sadness of what happened with Mike Leach. And, sometimes it takes you a while to kind of come out of some of that. Oh, we got more here. Oh, so this is Stoops that cursed? Yeah. So Stoops is, according to Pat Ford, also using the S word. He's cursing. I know. I realize that I'm the only one who feels this way. But we got way too much cursing. I mean, like Saban's cursing all the time on College Game Day. There's this thing now where everybody's cursing in politics now, which I think is kind of unbecoming. And I realize most people don't feel that way. I'm, as I said during the show, I'm the sort of corny guy, probably the only one who doesn't do that sort of thing. But honestly, if you're an SEC coach, you put the suit on to come here to media days. I think to use a swear word during your press conference, I just think that's conduct unbecoming. I'm the only one who feels that way, but I think that's conduct unbecoming. And frankly, I think the SEC would be within its rights to fine him. Chris Jacobs on the subject of Carson Beck talk. I am strongly considering we may do something on Beck tomorrow. Against my better judgment, there is something interesting out there on Beck. Some of y'all probably saw it. Against my better judgment, we may do this tomorrow for 5 seconds. Brodo Baggins says, I want Kelly fired. I can't stand him. Something else I believe I'm going to mention on the show tomorrow as it relates to Brian Kelly. Kelly did the one thing that I like when coaches do. I thought that Brian Kelly, because I'll be honest with you, while you're at media days, you're sometimes totally unaware of what's going on at media days. It's almost like you're just too close to it. There's just too much happening at once. And so I'm kind of going back and looking at some things that I missed. One of the things that I didn't notice from media days that I had missed was Kelly totally owning the fact that his teams have not done well in these Week 1 games. And they've got a doozy of a Week 1 game coming up here against Clemson. I love the fact that he's like, we need to win this game, because everybody knows that's true. But when the coach also admits that out loud, there's something kind of comforting from that. Not every coach does that. I'm a little bit surprised to say that he's one of the guys that I thought handled an issue well. But I think in that case, Brian Kelly probably handled that pretty well. Let me get some more YouTubes here. Bo Molinari, our resident A&M fan, checks in to say that Napier and Pittman are just as likely to get fired this year. Could very well be the case. And as I said, we root for Sam Pittman, hope he does. But I think that Pittman, of his own accord, I mean, listen, I think he'd be more than happy just to stop coaching. I think he feels like he's had a great career. He's certainly young enough he could keep coaching for much longer if he wanted to. But he's also sort of been there, done that. He certainly had way more success than his predecessor had at Arkansas. Has sort of kind of stabilized the situation that had gotten pretty desperate at Arkansas. So, he's a beloved, sort of a favorite son in that state. I would say he's probably time served well for him, job well done. If this is the end for him, I think that he's earned the right to go enjoy himself some time at the lake and playing his horses and all the stuff that he likes to do. I think that he's more than earned the right to go do that if that's the case there. The Napier thing is interesting because, look, and people don't necessarily take my opinions about Florida as objective, and maybe they shouldn't. But boy, it's a lot of love for Florida here right now, and I swear people just seem to forget that it was only a couple of months ago that we're talking about, does Billy Napier get fired last season, and what does he need to do to keep his job, and all the offensive changes they were supposedly demanding of him, coaching staff changes, things like that. For the most part, that never really happened, and yet he's just sort of back, and all of a sudden now people are like, Florida's going to make the playoff here this year against essentially the same schedule they played last year. That seems pretty wild to me. JC says, I hope that Jeff Lebby wins at least 4 or 5 games this year so BA will recognize him if he sees him at McDonald's. Yeah, we said this yesterday, that Lebby is, I think, the least recognizable SEC coach in my lifetime. I think that's probably the case. But maybe Lebby will do it. Here on YouTube, Foster Moss giving us a Goldberg, going back to the golden shoe. You like that? Let me go to Facebook here and see how they're doing. We'll get some of that here for you right now. We'll also get ready to wrap up here in a moment, too. You get to the point where, I'm almost getting sort of sensory overload. I sort of need to take a break here. Let me get some Facebook comments. By the way, Matt Rukavina reminding us that the likely starting quarterback for Kentucky this year is Zach Calzada, who has been in college football for 100 years. I mean, just has been here. I feel like he's been a topic at media days like 17 times. But yes, now at Kentucky, class of 2019, and now he's still playing in college. Ken Holcomb gives us some kind words. Great interview with Gunner Stockton. He says he's going to show some folks what being unassuming and a hard worker will do for you. Those North Georgia Mountain boys are tough, says the man checking in from the Carter K River. You like that from Kent? Very well said. Jamie Kennedy is here. I haven't seen Jamie in our chat in a minute, but Jamie, I'm glad you're here today. Great to see you here. Tennille Calvino says Facebook is still messing up. I hate that. And look, I'm relatively platform agnostic. I want to put the show out for as many different places as we can. A lot of you spend time on Facebook. We want to be where you are. I will tell you, though, and I say this all the time, just being as truthful as I can be, the Facebook video platform does not work like it used to. And video does not seem to be a huge priority for Facebook. That's just a thing that's true. What else is going on? Bill Sanders says Bill's done a lot of radio, things like that. A big radio guy in Middle Georgia says, I've learned over my 45 years in media to try not to speak in public in a way you would not speak on air. That's one of the reasons why, and anybody who works with me will tell you, you will never hear me use a swear word. That's just never been my thing. And part of that is for that very reason. I have known people, they'll be just cursing left and right, and then they sit down, they'll start talking, and they're now expected to talk a completely different way than they normally talk. I don't know how well I'd be at that. Plus, here's the other thing, too. When you're on a remote broadcast like this, you never really know what's on air and what's not. In fact, people get in trouble for what they call hot mic situations all the time. The mic is on, they don't realize it is. And so I just don't want to fall prey to that. Plus, I try to use edifying language. I don't know. Like I said, I'm probably a dork, but that's just kind of the way that I am. Jim Blair checking in from Moultrie, Georgia. I love the southwest corner of the state. Beautiful down there. He says Colquitt County and Benedictine Cadets less than a month away. That's a really fun game. Really fun game. And shout out to Benedictine for wanting to play the game. That's obviously a step up in weight class for them. And going to the hog pen to do it, that is not a fun experience for a smaller school, a very good school, state championship pedigree, just a smaller school. Not a fun experience, but a really good game on tap. That's really good. Todd David Brown says that Texas is on pace to spend $40 million. Not if you hear Steve Sarkisian say it, but yeah, it certainly seems like that's probably the case. Marshall Fleming says he doesn't believe that Nick Saban will ever coach again. I don't either. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the rumor's fun, and I think it's sometimes in the propaganda game kind of fun to sort of almost like a beach ball, just sort of keep batting in the air and just sort of see how long you can kind of keep it afloat. But yeah, probably not going to happen. What else on Facebook? Jennifer Stevenson Fleming checking in. Good to see Jennifer in the chat today. Todd David also pointing out, Todd David Brown, that Texas #1 NIL spending, according to On3, Georgia not in the top 10. We talked about that. If you're a Georgia fan, I think you take that as a good thing because you can always copy that if you need to. If what you do stops working and you need to spend more money, you can always do that. But once you spend all your money and you're still not good, what do you do then? It's a lot harder to copy what Georgia's trying to sell right now. All right, back on YouTube here. D. Linder says last year the Dawgs got the #1 defensive lineman in the nation. The question is, if they don't get him this year, is it time to panic? BA, I guess it is. I don't know that panic is the right word. And I think that sometimes people invent sort of a straw, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but people sort of invent a straw man on the other side of the point they're trying to make of the people who have shown some concern about an issue like this are panicking. And I don't know how true, well, actually, in some cases there probably is some panic. I guess I have seen some of that. But I don't know that the majority of Georgia fans who have shown some concern about this are panicking. I think the point is, and you're right, not only did Georgia get Elijah Griffin last year, there's a chance that Griffin is an important player in the Georgia defensive line rotation as soon as this year. At a certain point in the next couple of days, we're going to have some really good stuff that Kirby said about Elijah Griffin at media days that probably hasn't gotten enough attention yet. We'll try to give it the attention that it deserves. So, yeah, big deal to get Griffin. But as you also know, defensive tackle, defensive line is a volume game. You need multiple defensive linemen in every class. And you need high-level defensive linemen throughout your rotation to have a top-notch defensive line. So it's really good that Elijah Griffin came to Georgia. They'll probably be glad they have him as soon as this season. And yet the future of the Georgia defensive line needs more elite prospects in a similar category to that. And as I said during yesterday's show, they're just getting pricey. For instance, slightly different position, but same high school. I mean, we haven't really given this the attention that it deserves, but LaDamian Guyton, a guy that we have talked about before in the class of 2027, he's just gone. Like, he's not coming to Georgia. He's, I think, going to Texas Tech. Now, Texas Tech is not coming into Georgia for an elite prospect like this 1 year ahead of time, unless it's for, obviously, gigantic dollars, which seems to be the case, which is fine. You know, Georgia's not going to shed any tears when it loses Justice Terry. It shouldn't shed tears if it loses LaDamian Guyton. It shouldn't necessarily shed tears when it loses James Johnson. But when you see a lot of the guys who kind of play, broadly speaking, what we consider defensive line, all going elsewhere for big dollars, and, Georgia, we believe, is going to remain sort of committed to its own process, as I said yesterday, it becomes fair to ask, I like Georgia's plan. I like what it's doing. But does that also work for spot like defensive line where the recruiting battles seem to kind of come down to the biggest spender. What's the plan to get elite defensive linemen if it's not outspending your competition? There very well could be an affirmative answer on that topic from Kirby Smart, but it's a question that needs to be asked.
All right, you're talking Zach Calzada, so it just got me on this.
Yeah.
So Zach Calzada, senior at Lanier High School, 2018. AJC Super 11 in 2018.
Okay.
Dom Blaylock, Kyle Hamilton, Jaden Hazelwood.
Amazing.
Owen Papo, a name we
Yeah,
haven't talked about in a long
that's
time.
right.
Trayvon Walker. But these guys are like, Trayvon Walker's like looking at his second NFL contract.
Yeah,
and Zach
exactly.
Calzada is still
These
playing
are
college
his
football.
contemporaries. That's really, really amazing. So that only puts him, am I right about this? That only makes him 1 year younger than Stetson Bennett, right? Calzada's only like 1 year younger than Stetson Bennett, right? If he's 28, if he's class 2018, so so class of 20, so is that right? So Calzada's Kaylee's age, to give you a little bit more context here. Kaylee's been now working with us going on 2 years. Yeah, so Kaylee's been in her big girl job for like 2 years now. Yeah, that's pretty wild. But Bennett was class of 2017 originally, right? So he's only one class ahead of Stetson Bennett, and Stetson Bennett was made fun of for being old 3 years ago. That's pretty wild. Kyle Richter says, do you think you and Rusty will ever do a South Georgia football game? I'm telling you right now, Rusty and me both would go to South Georgia every week if we could. We really would. The challenge is, and the reason why we don't do more games in South Georgia is because you've got to take the entire broadcast down there. These are the cameramen, the truck driver, there's this huge operation that has to follow. And that's the part that's challenging. So if it was just Rusty and me showing up somewhere, we'd go to Moultrie, we'd go to Valdosta, we'd go to Kingsland, we'd go everywhere. We literally would. It'd be the thrill of my lifetime to do more games down in Region 1 for all the various classifications. It is a challenge to get the broadcast truck and all the people that need to travel with that down there. And so, we were in Thomasville a couple of years ago. I hope to be able to do more like that again. We do Middle Georgia pretty good bit. Frankly, our regular weekly broadcast probably travels farther than anybody does. And I'm proud of that. And I hope that we get a chance to be in, Houston County or Warner Robins or Peach County, somewhere like that, again this year. We were maybe going to go to Bowden last year. Maybe we'll do that this year. And I'd love to go all the way down to I'm talking about the deep South. I'd love to be there. I've done games in say Kingsland before for Colquitt County. I did a Camden County game hosting Colquitt County is what I mean. We did Thomasville before. That was a great experience. I'd love to do Brooks County. I'd love to do them all. I'd love to do all of that down there. But there's a lot more than me that travels, and that's where it gets a little bit challenging. Bo Molinari wondering if Mike Elko will get the return favor that what Steve Sarkisian got. And as he calls it, I've been working on the railroad. People know that the eyes of Texas are upon you has the same melody as I've been working on the railroad, which is very funny. Jonathan Aaron says, I understand you don't like when people curse, but don't you think it makes them look more human and less like a star people prop up? I get why you're saying that. I think in politics, a lot of the cursing you see now is just phony and fake. It's an attempt to appear real that was focus tested before it happened. That's what I believe on that. But I also think there's something to, people in a position of authority, head football coach in the SEC have that, acting at a level above the common man. I just think that's appropriate. Now, I also understand nobody agrees with me on this. I'm not trying to convince people. I'm not trying to tell you that this is the way that everybody thinks. Pretty clearly, my point of view on this is kind of in the minority. I'm sort of alone on this. Most people don't think this is a big deal, but I don't like it. I don't like, it's like you got McAfee cursing all the time on ESPN, Saban cursing all the time on College Game Day. I don't think that's good. Most people don't agree with me. They think I'm silly for feeling that way, which I'm fine with. My feelings aren't hurt by that. But I do feel pretty strongly about that. Let's see what else. Johnny Surf Dog on Bryce Young. I guess he's going back with G. Grace on this. I've said before, and I know y'all don't want to hear this, I do think the undervalued team in the NFL right now might be Carolina. Now, my NFL opinions aren't worth a nickel, but I think if there's an undervalued team in the NFL for this upcoming season, it might be Carolina. And like, I've got some of the rookie cards for some of the young quarterbacks. I wish I had more Bryce Young. I'll just say that. I wish I had more Bryce Young. Some of the guys I have, I don't know how much long-term hold potential they do have. I wish I had a little bit more Bryce Young in my life, because I think that he may be undervalued as a quarterback here right now. A Jerry Dog fan mentioned he's seeing Jeff down in Moultrie for a Colquitt game. Yeah, Jeff gets around. He'll do that. And I mean, to go to a game at the Hog Pen, I would love that. Love that. I like the high school stadiums that don't have tracks. I'm not against track and field, don't get me wrong. But when you don't have it, Calhoun doesn't have a track. When you have the high school fields that don't have tracks, like the grandstands are like on top of the field. I mean, the fans are just breathing down your neck. It creates an unbelievable atmosphere. It's so much fun. Yeah, so we've definitely gone more frequently to the top part of Georgia than we have the bottom part of Georgia. I have a suspicion about why that might be true, but we've definitely done more games near the North Georgia border than we have the South Georgia border for sure. All right, anything else? Spencer Clark says Columbus and the Albany area have been very good to us in recruiting. That's very true. Very true. By the way, shout out to Coach Del McGee, who certainly helped win a lot of those Columbus area recruiting battles. Now the head coach just down the road here at Georgia State. How about back on DawgNation.com before we wrap up for today? At DawgNation.com. Rambo says Popo and Britt made a good tandem there at Auburn. We ate them alive in 2020. Indeed, that was the case. And Popo, another example of the Grayson Rams, who kind of get away from Georgia a little bit. DT says Stoops is wearing a Carolina blue suit, maybe angling for the North Carolina head coaching job next year. Perhaps that's the case. That's interesting. UJ Marine checking out. Appreciate that. Rambo says he had a hot mic situation that almost got him in trouble until I blamed the expletive on coaches in an adjacent booth. That's funny, and I'll tell you that, for high school press boxes, now Buford, Gainesville, Carrollton, places like that, their press boxes are nicer than a lot of college stadiums. But most of the time for a high school press box, if it's Rusty and me sitting right here, oftentimes you've got the opposing coaches sitting almost close enough for me to touch. I mean, they're almost that close. And luckily, microphone technology is such that if you've got the headset microphone, the reason why the people wear headsets is because the headset mic doesn't pick up a lot. That it's, I guess what you call it, unidirectional, is what you call it? It's a unidirectional mic. It only sort of picks up what's coming straight into it. So you get this situation where like the coaches, one of the two teams will be sitting right next to us. And, listen, that is a very, you talk about real and raw conversations. The coaches in the booth during the game, that is not a ready for broadcast discussion. That is real. It is raw. It's just the height of emotion. And coaches are always so nervous and they realize they're sitting right next to us in the broadcast, but you really can't pick it up. Now, if they pound their fist on the table and scream loud enough, you may hear some of it, but you're really not going to hear very much of that, because in a lot of times in high school football, you'll have broadcast and coaches booth right next to each other, because the high school press boxes are obviously just much smaller. DT kind of pointing out something that's kind of interesting, that this week it did seem like they kind of jammed a lot of the sort of more interesting teams around the same time. Like Tuesday was a jam-packed day, which makes this a little bit obviously less substantial feeling. think some of that might be on purpose. Like I said, if you've ever been to a trade show in your profession, the last day is a pack up and go home day. I'm telling you right now, like Digital Alley or whatever we're calling this now is basically empty. People are packing up and going home, and we are going to get ready to do that too. So if it sort of feels like they sort of truncated the schedule, in a roundabout way, I think they sort of did, whether they should or not, but it sort of feels like this is not necessarily by accident. But either way, it's been a fun day of coverage for us. We've got more today for you, Dog Nation at large. Kaylee, Connor, Cody a part of that too. They'll have some great stuff for you. I, to be totally honest, am looking forward to being back in the studio for our show tomorrow because, I don't know, it's like I have like the worst like adult onset ADD, all the people talking at the same time. That's a lot for me to deal with. So I'm overstimulated. So I'm looking forward to kind of being in the friendly confines of our studio tomorrow. And we, by the way, have an outstanding guest. Our Jeff Sintel, the vacation that never ends, is still not ending. Jeff will not be with us tomorrow. But guess who will? Benjamin Watson, the SEC network analyst, the Super Bowl champion, most importantly, the former Dawg. Benjamin Watson. I recorded it yesterday. It's terrific. Really good insight on a number of topics. You're going to love this. Benjamin Watson with us tomorrow on DawgNation Daily. Can't wait to share that with you. For now, make sure you check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on that, including, with it being really hot outside, getting your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. So trust them on that. Find them online, rsandrews.com. That is rsandrews.com. And we will see you back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then.